Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche, and this week I thought I'd talk to you about native plant installation basics. I had some really good customer questions about that during our first couple of native plant sales, and since I'm diving into plant installation in my own yard today, I thought it would be some good information to share. So leading up to installing your native plants, you do want to make sure you keep them alive until you are ready to do the planting. So that includes keeping them watered. Oftentimes that means watering them at least once a day in those small pots. There's not a lot of soil and the roots can dry out quickly. You want to keep your, I'll call it my plant staging area, your flats of plants, out of high winds, in a sheltered location that gets some shade. So that'll help with moisture loss out of those pots. But a little bit of airflow is good so things don't get overly wet and moldy. And I would say be smart about it, put it where it's easy. I put mine by my back gate near the hose spigot, so it's easy to keep my flats of plants watered until I'm ready to dive in with the installation. You do want to take the time to prepare your planting area ahead of time, removing weeds, really thick turf, or other cover materials. I would say my most challenging was removing stone mulch around where I have demo gardens at the store. So you want to do that, and I suggest doing that well in advance of the actual native plant installation. One, you'll be really tired and you don't want to get discouraged when you're heading into the planting. So, and then if you use herbicide, which is what we use to prep here, I'm basically taking a chunk of lawn next to my driveway near the front of my house and converting that to a native planting. We just used a non-selective glyphosate-based herbicide in May once temperatures were above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And I let that sit for several weeks. And I'm going to plant right into that. So make sure you do your site preparation. And then you want to have some resources handy, plant characteristic documents to help you decide what should go where. If you aren't working from a detailed master plan, if you did some impulse buying, which even I am prone to do now and again, at different native plant nurseries, you should come up with a game plan. And so looking at these native plant characteristics, the horticultural information is really important. If you shop locally with me at my store, I do species list for each sale, and that has information on how much sun or shade particular plant species wants, how dry or wet the soil needs to be, how tall they get, and when they flower. So those are useful things to know and think about. If you're still sort of a step back from that and you need help selecting native plants for your landscape, make sure you check out Monday with Martha number 56, where I talk about that thought process of how do I pick out native plants that match my particular site. So after you've thought about that and you're familiar with the plants that you are going to install in your landscape, then you have to do the layout. So I really like placing all of my pots in an area first because I end up shifting some things around, tweaking spacing. It lets me step back and kind of see what it's going to look like before I commit and actually put things in the ground. You do need to think about a material's mature size. Is it a shrub that's going to get several feet across? Is it a spreading ground cover? Is it a relatively small wildflower? And space things accordingly. So I encourage you to explore native ecosystems to get more familiar with what native plants look like when they're big and mature and happily growing, or go to other people's native plant gardens and landscapes. That's why I do demonstration gardens at Nature Niche at the store. Join your local Wild Ones chapter near you, kind of look at some of their plantings, or other demo gardens at your local nature center or land conservancy properties. You do want to, when you're doing a layout, plant species and multiples, a single species, multiple plants in one area. I would say aim for at least a 3-foot circle of a single species, one that gives you visual impact. You'll have more flowers of the same color and type and timing in one place. Some species are dioecious, which means they have all male or all female plants, especially trees and shrubs. And so if you want good fruit for wildlife, you need to have multiples for that purpose. And it's easier for the pollinators to find the plant they're looking for if there are multiple of them. So when you're laying things out, in general, a rule of thumb is to put the tallest things in the back and sort of grade down in height with the lowest things in front. If you have traffic that's going all around a particular planting area, then traditionally tallest things go in the middle. And that way you can see and enjoy all of the plant species and one thing isn't blocking another. You do want to think about views from both your outdoor travel paths and inside your home. Make sure especially the accent plants you're putting in are easily seen, and you want to make sure tall or really bushy things aren't where they'll obstruct views, your movement. Think about access to your hose spigots, stairs up to your deck, things like that. And then you want to begin planting from the back to the front or from the inside out to the edge, just so you don't get in your own way as you're actually sticking those plants into the ground. All right, so depending on what size plant material you're installing, you want to pick the appropriate digging tool. Maybe that's me stating the obvious, but if you are digging, say, for one of the really big 7-gallon tree bags or something like that, you're going to want to use a longer bladed spade to start digging that hole. I am going to show you a little dogwood shrub that the birds planted for me that I'm rescuing out of one of my planting areas. And for that, because the root system wasn't too deep, I'm just using a regular shovel to prep that hole. For smaller potted material, my tool of choice is a soil knife. So it has a handle that's easy to grip and a serrated margin, which is great for cutting into roots if you need to, and it's just the right size to get that hole and make it easy to pop in 2.5 inch and plug size material. So when you dig a hole for like a larger woody plant, the general rule of thumb is to make the hole 2 to 3 times as wide as the pot or the root ball that you are installing. And you want to make sure you've broken up the side wall of the hole, and that helps the roots penetrate into the surrounding soils as the tree or shrub gets established. So I've sort of pre-dug this hole and done that process. And then I'm going to take this. As you can see the root system on my dogwood shrub here. Actually, it's in a couple of pieces that I'm rescuing. And so I'm going to install these. And when you plant material, this is true of herbaceous potted material or the woody plants, you want to make sure that you don't plant it too deep. You want to find where the base of the plant meets the root system, or it's called a root collar. So you want to make sure that when you're installing that the soil is covering the roots, but you aren't burying it up the stem, because that can cause moisture and it can rot the stem. So I'm going to start filling in the soil I left at the side of this pit. And I'm actually holding the plant at the level I want it. And you want to backfill around it and then press firmly. Help that soil kind of settle all around the root area. And I'm going to do the same thing with my other little bonus dogwood shrub I have here. Just taking care to make sure I'm not planting too deep, but that I'm also fully covering its root system. And then pressing firmly. And then I like to replace, so I'm just using the leaf litter in the edge of my little forested strip here I have along the side of the house. It really makes great cover for moisture retention. It retards weed growth, and I just sort of let it decompose in place. If I were using wood mulch around a more formalized planting, I'd put that down initially, and then I would let it decompose and not feel like it's something I have to replace all the time and keep the plants separated by a sea of mulch. I think letting it degrade, it'll add organic matter to the soil, and eventually your plants will fill in, your ground cover kind of workhorse species will fill in and take on that soil moisture retention and weed control services that mulch would. In this setting, I'll just leave my leaves in the fall, let that be the ground cover around these dogwood shrubs. And then after you've backfilled and replaced your mulch, then I like watering in, just checking to make sure I didn't miss any sinkholes or anything like that. Give everything a good drink as you're installing it. And then I'll just do a quick demo on smaller plant material. And I think on smaller materials, sometimes we just don't dig deep enough. So kind of the flip side of that, don't plant too deep coin is don't plant too shallow. So that's where these soil knives are really handy for just popping in, getting that hole deep enough for the rooted material, and then backfill, press firmly. I'll surround again with some leaf litter. And then water that in to do a final settling, make sure there are no gaps of air around that plant. But you want to make sure you're planting level with the surface of the soil in the pot with the ground. If I left this up too high, roots would be exposed to air and the plant will desiccate and die. Okay, so once you have your plant material installed, you want to think about herbivory and browsing by your local deer populations, the rabbits. And so anyone who buys a tree or shrub for me and has any sort of deer activity, I highly, highly encourage the use of a tree cage, shrub cage, bunny barricade, lower cage to go around that woody material. And that I would put in place right away. They have a tendency of finding new plant material quickly, sometimes even overnight, and leaving that in place for the first growing season or two or more, depending on how bad your deer browse pressure is. But that lets these plants get their root systems well established, and they'll be able to sprout back after occasional browsing by deer or rabbits. So once you have your plant material installed, I do recommend either using the nursery tags or making your own sort of plant tags to stick in as a visual cue. That way you know where you put something in. It helps with monitoring, remembering where you planted stuff the next spring, keeping track of whether something's been browsed or not. And it's just a handy way to keep track of things. If you aren't able to do the tree cages I showed you or something like the bunny barricade, on things and you're having trouble with browsing mammals, then you might consider a spray on repellent, something like Liquid Fence or Grandpa Gus's, or some sort of browsing deterrent. Those have to be applied often after rain events, but it might help you as your plants are initially getting established. Monitoring is a really key part of that initial native plant installation process. You're going to want to watch for do the plants need water? Are you in the middle of a drought? Do you see signs of wilting? Has it not rained in a week? Those are all, good things to think about, and don't be afraid to do some supplemental watering that first growing season, or in our case in Michigan this spring, just super severe drought, to keep your investment in your native plants safe. You also occasionally need to weed, especially very aggressive competitive species. And just look, if deer come through, they tend to bite and tug, and sometimes your little potted material will just pop right out with that tug. So especially that first week or two, walk around your native plantings every day or so. You might have to pop some stuff back in, re-water, and hopefully it'll be okay if you can find it before that plug of soil and roots dries out. A couple of things you don't want to do: you don't want to fertilize. Our native plants don't need it, and all you do is sort of increase the chances of weed competition. You also don't want to spray pesticides, especially systemic insecticides. We want our native wildlife and our pollinators to use these plants, and you don't want those chemicals in your landscapes. So if you think you have a pest problem that's threatening the life of your native plant material, I definitely encourage you to seek professional help. Reach out to your local university extension program, to a professional horticulturalist or arborist, to figure out what you really have and what your treatment options might be. Otherwise, signs of insects eating your plants, pollinators using the flowers, the caterpillars happily munching on the leaves, leafcutter bees taking out sections, those are all badges of honor for the native plant gardener. So I'll end by saying, make sure you enjoy your new native plant installations. Watch for pollinators, enjoy the wildlife, eating the fruit, using the seeds, enjoy the beauty of the wonderful blooms, and just how special and diverse it makes your landscape. Take care, have a good week.